I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Mr. Robert Hutchings. I'll be chairing the hearing today. I'm joined on the board by Mr. Brent McIntyre and Ms. Valerie Warren. Representing the Assessment Department, City of Winnipeg, is Mr. Jonathan Spacek and Mr. Ryan Valderrama. Our administrative personnel today is Ms. Sharma. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessment of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions by the applicant and the panel members, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questioning by the assessor and the panel members again. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions based on the evidence presented here today. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 5 through 7 on our docket today. Ms. Sharma, please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony.
Yeah. Assessor for item 5, please state your full name.
Jonathan Spacek.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Thank you. Assessor for item 6 and 7, please state your full name.
Ryan Valderrama.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
There you go, Farmer.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma.
I'm putting Mr. Valderrama in waiting room so that we can proceed with item 5 first.
Yes. Okay, first item on docket today. Welcome to the assessor and the applicant, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Spacek. Item on the docket is number 5 is going to be file number 24-2378, roll number 14-1000-56100. The address is 865 Main Street, and we're dealing with a 2025 realty assessment appeal. When the assessor is ready, please, 865 Main Street.
Mr. Chairman, I think on this one, the only issues under examination are liability and class and not value.
Okay.
And I'm guessing you would like me to go first in that context, but I'll leave that for you to consider.
Okay. Okay. So we're not dealing with the realty value at all. You're asking for that to be confirmed?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I'm not, I think the grounds in this particular case I thought were only class and liability, but for sure I can say with certainty that if value was indicated as a point of appeal, we're just asking for the value to be confirmed.
No, it's just class and liability as point of appeal. There's no value to be appealed.
Right.
Okay. So that allows Mr. Reimer to go first, is that right? To the assessor?
According to the meeting proceedings, I think assessor is the one to present first and then the applicant. As such, I'm not 100% sure if any of the other panel member has anything else to say on it.
Yeah.
I think for class and liability, from my experience, the burden of proof is on the appellant. So I do think they usually go first.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I would agree. I would agree with that, Mr. Chairman. The burden is on
Okay.
us for class and liability.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, Mr. Reimer, allow us to get to your brief, please.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. Reimer, I'm going to ask you to quickly skim over your evidence on your brief, and then we'll deal with the class and liability.
Thank you very much. So the
property.
So the property that is currently at the hearing is 865 Main Street, roll number 14-100-056-100. It's board's file number 24-2378. And if we turn briefly to page 2, Mr. Chairman. So as you can see on page 2, and as mentioned, the assessed value is not in appeal for this particular property. It's rather the classification and liability, the classification following the liability, the board's ruling on liability. And our request is to amend the 2025 assessment such that $252,000 of the value of the entire property is declared 40S, institutional 40S school tax exempt, with the remainder remaining unchanged at code 60 other taxable. And that value that we calculate for that component is $2,497,000. The total of those two components then is the exact same value shown on the roll at $2,749,000. If we could go briefly, the issue is actually quite simple, Mr. Chairman. If we could go briefly to page 7. So this is a property at the corner of Main Street and Euclid Avenue, constructed between 1903 and 1952, and there was a small addition of 3,273 square feet in 2010. Total area is 29,330 feet. It's actually a 2-story structure with a basement. So you can see from the chart on page 7, the main floor is 13,421 square feet. Upper floor is 10,148 square feet, and the basement is 5,761 square feet. If we go to then, and I'll just cut to the heart of the matter for the sake of brevity, if we go to our page 11, please. So the basis of our request this afternoon for the school tax exemption is based on section 23(1)(d), where the exemption states that it's exempt from taxation for school purposes where the property is owned or held in trust for and is used by a college or seminary of learning to a maximum exemption of 1.62 hectares. In this case, on the main floor of the subject, there is a portion of the main floor that is dedicated for educational purposes. I'll get to the floor plan in a moment, but it's consisting of office numbers 140, 148, 146, and 147, which are washrooms, and then 145, 149, and items 150 to 153, which is by our estimation 20% of just the main floor area, not the basement, not the second floor. So that component is dedicated to classroom and for classroom and educational purposes. Taking that percentage of 20% to the main floor area of 13,421 gives us an estimate of the requested school tax exempt component of 2,684 square feet. The calculation that we've then performed is based on that 2,684 square feet is just over 9%, 9.15% of the total assessment or total area, I should say, and using that, using that proportionate share, taking the 9.15% and multiplying it by the total assessed value would indicate a school tax exempt assessment of 251,580, rounded to 252,000. I can advise the board, I didn't have the benefit of reviewing the details of the assessor's income valuation for the property. I do note that I did run a calculation in terms of the assessment caused by that same area, and it would result in a higher indicated exempt component of roughly 367,000, but I don't have that in evidence. I was only able to do that after receiving the department's brief. So for the purposes of the hearing this afternoon, I will be maintaining the request at the 252,000, which is based on proportionate share, essentially, based on the square footage of the property. Turning briefly, the occupant in this case is, and the description of the educational program starts at page 14. The Shawananam Abinogi education programs, they are providing Indigenous youth with various educational programs and offer that. There's a number of different, as you can see on pages 14 and 15, there's a number of different locations for these educational programs. The subject has, as I say, dedicated that space on the main floor for the same educational programming, and that forms the basis of the request. If we turn then briefly to our page 17, please, and I'll point out to the board the areas that I've been referring to. So on page 17, this is the main floor plan, and you can see on that page in the upper sort of right-hand quadrant, the offices and the classrooms indicated there. Classrooms specifically are 149 and 153. The office is dedicated for those educational purposes, as are the 147, 146, and 148. And 140. Those facilities there are again dedicated as part of the educational component for the subject. So it's on that basis that we're requesting the school tax exemption just for that component, and ask the board to order accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Does the assessor have any questions of the applicant's evidence?
Yeah, just a few. I'll try to cover my points in the questions here. First of all, on your page 11, so I'm assuming, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, for the exemption from school taxes, we're saying this is either owned or held in trust for and is used by a college or seminary of learning. So are you considering the educational purposes of the space seminary of learning in this case?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yep.
Okay. And for, I guess, when we reviewed this property in the past, and when I've obviously reviewed this property to see, is there anything I can do to consider the seminary of learning, some of the checkpoints for seminary of learning, would you agree that there is required to be a curriculum designed to further the advancement in life of those in attendance or relevant? That's the point I struggle with to find, and that's kind of, I think, on our end, what a lot of hinges on some of these, changing it to school tax for education purposes. Do you have, I was trying to find on the website and trying to search for a curriculum that's being taught there. Would you have any of that to provide for us?
The details, so that's a fair question, Mr. Chairman. So I go back to pages 14 and 15. So the quick answer to the question posed specific to this site is I couldn't find anything, or wasn't given any information specific to the site that went beyond pages of 14 and 15. But Mr. Spacek, to give you a sense of what's running through it, specifically on page 15, they talk about the education centers and students continue their education at their own pace, starting at any level, and earn the credits needed to return to school. And they also talk about education resource centers to work with students that live in the homes in that area, working in partnership with St. River in those cases to provide programming for students in K-8 and then some of the senior years as well. As to specifically what is happening in this facility day in and day out, my understanding is it's based on that general framework, but I can't give you anything more specific than that relating to this location, which I believe was your question.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. And my next question is, you're speaking to page 14. So when I read this page and I looked for information, I did try to find what schooling they taught in 865 or 865 Main Street. And when I read the bottom of page 14, I see the Shawanim Abenuji School, which is the alternative high school and mature student program located at the Nijinen Center. Would you agree that the Nijinen Center is located at 118 Higgins?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
This is,
so
none of this specific, and to be clear, Mr. Spacek and Mr. Chairman, recall my comments, none of the information on those two pages specifically refers to the subject property. My understanding is the programming is further to these objectives, but none of it points specifically to 865 Main, but it's another facility used for those same purposes.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to confirm, in my research, I found that 865 Main is considered the head office or the main office for, I guess, what I understand to be happening there is there's lots of different departments within this organization, and they've put all of their programs at 865 Main, so these smaller programs can work together there. Is that the main purpose of the property? Yeah, 100%. And it's again a good question, Mr. Spacek and Mr. Chairman. If you turn to our page 17, you can see it's actually I've been in the building. I was in the building last year and inspected it, and there's a lot of different things going on. There's actually what I'd consider to be a religious component with the elders area there on page 17. That would be to the west of the classroom space, and all of those offices that are there and that Mr. Spacek's referring to, that is essentially a centralized building for all those functions that this organization carries out, one of them being the education function. Similarly, on the next page with the second floor, there are a number of different functions or offices and functions going on there. So I would suggest that Mr. Spacek's characterization of it that way is absolutely bang on. Our point being that the educational component is part of it. All right, thank you for your answers. That's all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre, any questions of the applicant?
Since you've submitted evidence on the leasable area at 29,330 square feet, is that correct?
Yes.
And have you read the assessor's brief?
I have.
And did you determine there's a variance between the leasable area?
There is. I had from the owner the 29,000 that we've submitted, and I noticed that the assessor's records showed 28,498. I did notice that discrepancy. I'm going to stick with the area I was given, just because it came directly from the owner, but I do note that discrepancy there as well.
So what you're essentially asking the board to rule on the discrepancy in square footage?
I'm asking the board, if the board is comfortable with the request, I'm asking the board to use the 29,330 as the denominator in the calculation of the school tax exempt component, yes.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, any questions of the applicant?
Mine was just answered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer. I think in your presentation, you said there were some religious components going on there, like with the elders and that kind of thing.
Yes.
I note that the rest of the building is done as class code 60.
Yes.
As offices, is that right?
Various offices. So if you turn to page 17, Mr. Chairman, so part of when I went out and inspected it, this sort of at the bottom, towards the middle of that page, you see what looks like a circle with elders in it.
Yes.
So it's very interesting. That is essentially a part of the facility, and it goes all the way up to the second floor. That is used for spiritual purposes and is used to basically as a meeting with elders by various individuals. And some of the offices in that very area are used for that same purpose. But what I concluded when I looked at that is that it wouldn't qualify as a religious organization under the framework of the Act. So I did not include that in my request. It's only the classroom portion that I'm requesting.
Oh, okay. And then sticking with page 16 and 17, I guess we've established there's a difference in estimated square footage. 16, I think you mentioned you had inspected the property, is that correct, recently?
I have. Yeah, last year it was, yeah.
Okay. So maybe let's start in the basement. Do you know what would be considered leasable area in the basement?
What we've got actually, so if you turn to page 7, Mr. Chairman.
7. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, was your workup.
Yeah.
Okay, bear with me 1 second, please. Okay, there we go. All right.
Yeah.
Would you mind going through that?
Yeah, so we've got the basement area, what we're considering to be the leasable area of 5,761, and then the main floor area of 13,421, and the upper floor is actually smaller at 10,148.
Okay.
And the reason for that is if you turn to the very last page, to page 18.
Okay.
You can see, and this is the second floor floor plan now, you can see that there's a bunch of open area. It says open gathering, open to look. That's why there's a difference in the first and second level square footage.
Okay. I see. Okay. So in your opinion, the estimate of 29,000, sorry, approximately 29,000 square feet has been inspected and is accurate?
That's the information, yep, that I was provided by the owner, and I believe it to be accurate, notwithstanding the variance. I think it's about, well, it's just under 1,000 square feet between that and the leasable area that the department's showing, yep. All
right. And these are the blueprints as without measurements that we see.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
All right. And did this used to be Nietzsche Common, am I right?
Exactly right. That's exactly right, yeah.
Okay, we've got it, okay, yeah. And then I'm gonna ask on page 15, I'll call it a brochure. So they're providing a classroom space for students to come in from other areas of the province with that and the city?
And the city, that's right, yeah. The problem, and I think this was kind of what Mr. Spacek was sort of alluding to as well, it's not a specifically, it's based on the needs of their, the folks they're trying to serve, and so there's, the space is dedicated to educational purposes, but it's not a rigid, it's based on providing that facility to the extent that they need it, in addition to what's shown on page 14 and 15. So same objectives, but and I was the same as Mr. Spacek. I made some inquiries, and I also looked on the web, and there's no specific reference to this property, but having seen it and having spoken with the folks, it is there to provide the same kind of services as shown on page 14 and 15.
Okay, so just for clarification, if it says it's providing like brochures and support for other programs and other areas, according to the Act, in your opinion, is that the equivalent of being a classroom?
A seminary of learning, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Spacek, is that the difference in your opinion, whether it is or it isn't?
Yeah, I think just to keep it simple is when I'm looking at giving this sort of class and liability, giving it the 40S, we've kind of gotten to this point where there needs to be some sort of curriculum designed and being taught there, and that's just the stance we're taking on our side of it, and that's kind of what this one, where I find that it fails to pass. So I think that's the main point and what it would come down to in a more in-depth argument, say. But I think Carrier and I are on the same page of what's happening here and what they do, and it's just there's this kind of like, there's just some checks that it has to pass, and I can't find anything to pass that check. So that's kind of where we are at our end.
So sorry, we're jumping ahead asking you questions, but just for clarification, so you're saying that this being a support classroom isn't the equivalent of actually having teaching there?
Yeah, like there needs to be some sort of program being taught there, or it needs to have a curriculum is being taught by the teachers, and I just couldn't find anything of something being. That's one of the checks to be a seminary of learning from what I've found from prior orders. I can't find that check, if that makes sense.
Okay, so Mr. Reimer, back to you. In this square footage, you're declaring if a student comes in to use the facility, is there staff appointed, like teachers and that kind of thing to with them?
That there would absolutely there would. So to the extent that they are using this facility, and there's a distinction I'm making. The space that I'm talking about is dedicated to this use. But what I will tell you is, for instance, on the day that I was there, the space is available and set up, but there was actually no students in on that particular day. But when the students come in, absolutely there are teachers there that are working through the I don't know if curriculum is the right word, but working through the educational programming and the programs that they offer there. And if the students aren't there on a particular day, then they wouldn't be. So it's that kind of flow as far as what's being carried out at that space.
Yeah, so it's a classroom that isn't necessarily full all the time. Totally dependent on who comes from other schools or other organizations they're associated with, and when they do come in, they are supported if they need it.
Precisely right.
All right, I think that answers my questions. Okay. And again, Mr. Reimer, you're agreeing with the income and expense valuation, but applying a split class code for the exemption.
Precisely right. Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you. Mr. Spotchuk, allow us to get to your brief, please.
No problem.
And where are you? Okay. When you're ready, please, 865 Main Street.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We're looking at file number 24-2378, roll number 14100005610. This is 865 Main Street. Again, there's no question the assessed value is not in contention. It's for 2025. It was at $2,749,000, and Carrie did a great job of describing the property. I think between our questions and answers and his presentation for the class and liability, that is the main issue. I don't have anything new to add. I guess do you want me to quickly summarize our position, or is there anything else we're looking for in a situation like this?
I would like you to go through your brief on the valuation side, even though it's not in contention, just to enter into evidence. In other words, what blended rate you use for the class code 60, and a summary of that, please.
No problem. So we have 28,498 square feet on page 6. You'll be able to see for the standard finish, so the first and second floor, we have 1285 a square foot. For the basement leasable, we have 5,761 square feet at $8.17. And I just need a calculator if you want the blended rate. It's a blended rate of $11.90. We have our standard OFS vacancy loss for suburban properties at 6% for 2025. Expenses are 3%, shortfall $8, and we have an overall model-driven capitalization rate of 7.8%. So that's how we come to the agreed upon value of $2,749,000. And yeah, again, that is my presentation on the value there.
Okay. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. I'm going to chime in right now and say, when I look at your NOI capped at 7.8%, you stated as set $3,790,000, and yet the value you're using is $2,749,000. Can you explain that?
Sorry, I'll have to say that again. If there's an error, I don't have it open anymore.
Page 6, your income workup.
Yeah.
You come up with a capitalized value of $3,790,000.
Oh, yeah. So the assessed value was sent out at $2,749,000. So I don't have the proper workup in front of me. I'd have to actually go look at what Advis sent out as of the as of the reference date, the 2,749,000.
So somebody did an override, is that correct?
You know what? Whether it was an override or we adjusted the parameters to make the building characteristically correct, it happened after. So our old model had it at 3,790,000. Again, characteristically has been adjusted, and the income works out to 2,749,000 now.
Okay, and that's what's in the roll?
Yes, that's what was sent out. That's what that's what the appeal is for 2,749,000. What was sent out?
Okay,
That's the
perfect.
2025 value.
Yeah, sorry, I just.
Yeah, good. I missed that.
Yeah, okay. All right, now, okay, so we've done the valuation. Can you present your evidence or opinion of why it should be not a split class code for exempt, school exempt?
Yes, and I think in a case like this, I put out most of my evidence in the questions, but I'll just restate quickly that, again, from what I could find doing research on this after receiving the appellant's brief on class and liability and we did look at an exemption request before for this property when it switched from that retail use as the Nietzsche Commons to the office use it is now. The property is the main office, so 865 Main Street is the main office, but I don't disagree that there are 2 classrooms in there. It really comes down to, as I stated before, is how do we determine if it is a seminary of learning? We have had some guidance on that on some, prior orders, and one of them, as I stated, I think the one I get stuck on when trying to find out if it's 40S is, does this have a curriculum that they follow and teach there? And again, it's a unique situation. I would agree with Carrie that it's again not standard. They have 2 schools in their system that are actually labeled as schools at 181 Higgins, and then the other school listed that is out of town. And then this is a main office with some classrooms, and we don't believe that it should be granted the 40S on our end, as there's no kind of set curriculum we can find that is being taught there. So that's where we get caught on this one, and that's our position.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reimer, any questions, comments?
No questions, just would prefer to have a very quick summary, please.
Yeah.
Once it's to that stage, thanks.
Okay. Ms. Warren, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, just for clarifications, for the city to consider it school tax exempt, tax exempt, would the teachings have to go on every day? Like, would they have to be there the majority of the time?
I don't believe it has to be every day or majority of the time. From what I've done research on prior orders, it's the dominant primary purpose of the institution is educative. It has, if it's a bona fide school, the presence of students, physical facilities, teachers or instructors, and a curriculum designed to further the advancement in life of those in attendance are relevant. So I'm not saying they have to be teaching every day, but they need some sort of program they are teaching, and we almost need to see a record of that program or that curriculum, if that makes sense. That's kind of going down the checklist. We get there, and then it's just I don't see a curriculum that they're teaching, or whether that's just on our end. What is one of the checks we have to do to see if it's a seminary of learning? Okay,
so that would have been the main criteria then.
Yeah, I'd say that's what on my end, doing the research, trying to figure out if this is or not, that's what it comes down to. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre.
Just one question. Has this been inspected lately after Nishi Commons converted it to the current use?
Do you know what the exact, not recently, but Carrie and I believe Jennifer Martins were the last through, and maybe I think Carrie said a year ago.
Yes, so to answer, I can assist with that, Mr. Chairman. To answer the question, that the inspection that Ms. Martins and I did was after the current occupant took occupancy of the building, including the classroom space. So it was after the conversion from Nietzsche Commons.
Okay, Mr. Rem, I'll go back to your presentation where there was offices. The square footage you're using on the exemption basis, is it just those 2 properties identified as classrooms?
No, it's actually, so if you need not turn there, Mr. McIntyre, but there's a listing on our page 11, there's a listing of all the room numbers that references back or refers back to the plan on page 17. So if you go to page 17 and the areas that that are dedicated for this purpose, it's items 149 through 153. So 49, 50, 51, 52, and 53. And then 145, 146, 147, and 148. And I think I have 149 as well. Yeah, 149 as well, based on my inspection there. So it's only those areas on that plan that are included in our request.
So I hate to be picky about this, but room number 151 looks like an entrance.
There is an exterior vestibule there, but it's part of. I wouldn't carve that out from the classroom space. It's part of that area. Similarly with the office, office number 1.
Not including any of the offices from 132.
I'm sorry?
You're not including any offices on that row from 132 to 137?
Oh, no. That's not part of the classroom facility or the classroom component. No.
So again, there's only one office associated with the classroom.
Yes.
Dedicated area.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you. Mr. Smotchek, so I understand Ms. Martin's inspected this. Any comments on the difference in square footage between her and the applicant?
No comment. I mean, there's definitely been a range. Even the mailer I've included on my brief I was looking at, and they've reported in 2022 31,317 leasable. So it's somewhere between there. Exactly, I don't. When we have different ones like this, I can't give you a certain number.
Yeah. Okay. And was there ever a sale of this building after the renovations to this organization that you're aware of? That was.
I just believe the only sale I have on record was 2022, and I believe it was a sale to a quote unquote investment a corp name. So I don't know if it was a related sale or what, but it's
Okay.
So it's right around our value is at $2,750,000.
Okay. I'm going to ask you an unfair question, I guess, but do you agree with Mr. Reimer's calculation for the exempt area at approximately 9%?
Yeah, I didn't. Again, I think Mr. McIntyre brought up a good point. I don't know exactly what needs to be included in that school portion, so I really can't give you a certain answer. I didn't look at it in that light.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. All right. That is all my questions. Mr. Smotchek, any requirement for summary?
No, I just explained. Thank you everyone for your patience today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reimer.
And it comes down, Mr. Spotchik's been very forthright, and it truly, Mr. Chairman, it just comes down to a difference of opinion as to what should qualify as a seminary of learning. We'd suggest the space is dedicated for that use, and it is used for that use. Not each and every day. That much is obvious and was obvious to me when Ms. Martins and myself inspected it, but dedicated for that very purpose. And we're asking, notwithstanding that there's no specific curriculum or very, the same structure as a typical school, we suggest it still qualifies. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reimer. Okay, that concludes item number 5865 Main Street, and I believe, Mr. Spotchek, you are done. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you, everyone.
Okay,
have a great afternoon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Aye.
And we'll allow Ms. Sharma to call Mr. Valderrama in, please.
There he is.
Okay, welcome, Mr. Valderrama. You've been sworn in, I believe.
Yes, I was, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next item on the docket is item number 6, file number 24-3259, roll number 1102-062-7000. Address is 1790 Main Street, and we're dealing with a 2025 Realty Assessment Appeal. Mr. Valderrama, when you are ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next file, as mentioned earlier, by the chairperson, the file number is 24-3259 with a roll number of 1102062700. The property is located at 1790 Main Street. We're dealing with the roll year of 2025 using reference date of April 1st, 2023. The assessed value is $997,000 with a classification of other property and a liability of taxable. The property is a commercial strip or store, and it has one building, 3 premises, 1 story. It has an actual and effective year built of 1981. It has an average wall height of 11 feet and a construction class of masonry bearing walls. It is zoned as C2 commercial or community.
Mr. Valderrama, could I ask you to turn up your volume, please?
Sure. I'm gonna just gonna oh, hang on one sec, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Microphone. Audio. It's how about now, Mr. Chair? Is it better or still
Yes.
the same?
No, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. And where was zoning? It is a C2 commercial community with a land area of 7,301 square feet, a planned area of 4,142 square feet, a gross floor area of 4,142 square feet, and a leasable area of 4,142 square feet. I believe, Mr. Chair, there is a class and liability appeal on this file.
Oh, okay. Is that right, Mr. Reimer?
Yep. Yes, indeed. There's class liability and in this case, assessed value, all 3 points of appeal. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess you're going to be going first, right?
So I won't speak to value, then I'll speak to class and liability only and then revert back to the assessors to the value, correct?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So if I could then, Mr. Chairman, so Mr. Valderrama read in the particulars of the case. Do you want me to do that again or I need not do that?
I think you don't need to do that. Well,
okay.
Yeah, fine.
Perfect. So if we could turn in our, tell me when you've got it, Mr. Chairman, our submission to the board.
Okay, yeah, if you just wait 1 second, Mr. Reimer. Okay, 1790 Main Street. Okay, and when you're ready, Mr. Reimer.
Thank you. Page 15, please.
Okay.
So page 15, the request this afternoon for this property, Mr. Chairman, it relates to a space that's leased and occupied by a tenant called Options, Pathways, and Transitions. We're asking that that component of this assessment be changed from Code 60 Other Taxable to Code 40 Institutional School Tax Exempt. The request is based on the provisions of Section 23(1)(e) of the Act, and that's just beneath the introductory paragraph on page 15. Sub E states that real property is exempt from taxation for school purposes where it's owned by or held in trust for and is used by a charitable organization, that being the first hurdle. Is it a registered charity? Primarily for the purpose of giving relief or assistance to aged, indigent, or sick persons. And we'd suggest certainly that, and I'm just going to refer to this space as the options space. The options space definitely, in our respectful opinion, qualifies for that. The charity registration is attached, and actually the charity registration indicates very succinctly what this organization does is it provides daycare services for adults with an intellectual disability. And that really sort of encapsulates the objectives and the services provided by this organization. I've listed some of the programming and services that are part of the organization on page 15, enhancing the quality of life of individuals through education, training, and integration, to be recognized as a premier facility for adults with intellectual physical disabilities, providing opportunities to develop individual potential through education and training that ultimately the hope is will lead to meaningful work, to empower persons with disabilities to live independently, and to empower persons with disabilities to live healthy, safe, and secure lives. So there's obviously, it's an organization that's devoted to helping individuals with intellectual disabilities in a wide manner of with a wide manner of programming. Starting on page 16, I've taken some excerpts from the webpage of this particular organization. And if you turn to page 17, it's sort of a very interesting set of points that this organization puts out on the website, some of which I had just gone through. The second bullet point on page 17, all individuals we support are empowered to thrive and participate fully in society with little or no limitations. So this is a facility that's dedicated to helping these individuals who otherwise may be extremely disadvantaged, just to be able to integrate and to certainly participate in society to a much greater level. The other points I had already mentioned earlier. I do note about halfway down, it says we will educate and support individuals and their families with the goal of assisting them in making sound choices about lifestyles that enhance their quality of life. You know, so it's all this sort of the same theme where the organization is providing this programming to just assist these individuals with the disabilities to maximize their potential, both at and outside of the facility. On page 18, there's a listing of the kind of programming that they offer to these individuals, including art, drama, and music, recreation, work experience. As mentioned earlier, one of the objectives is to help them to gain meaningful work experience. So there's a whole number of items there. The lifelong learning on the sort of top right-hand corner is very interesting. It talks about literacy, computer skills, sign language, among other things. So they're providing all of these services to these disadvantaged individuals, and essentially providing care during the day, specifically the day care facilities for the individuals to benefit from the programming. So turning then briefly to page 20. Now, in this case, Mr. Chairman, we did have the ability to specifically to present a valuation. Present a valuation based on our valuation factors, our parameters for this specific space. And as you can see there on page 20, the suggestion we have using the capitalization rate and the rental rate shown there that we're suggesting results in a calculation of $226,000. So it is that amount of the assessment, the $226,000, that we're requesting be school tax exempt. What I am going to ask, just briefly, I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it's starting at page 32 specifically now. I mentioned earlier that this section of the Act specifically has the criteria of being a registered charity or a charitable organization. Pages 32 through 35, this is the printout from the federal government's charity list confirming that they are in fact a registered charity. And on page 33, I'd referred to this earlier, but the ongoing programs they reference for this organization is providing daycare services for adults with an intellectual disability. And that probably sums it up as well as could be, and then with the details that I provided to the board as to how they do that very thing. For the board's reference, I've included, starting at page 37, a copy of the Court of Appeal decision in WASO, just confirming that the leasehold interest by options is sufficient to create an ownership interest for the purposes of Section 23 of the Act. So it's there for the board's reference. And so we therefore ask the board to amend the assessment roll to exempt to provide a school tax exemption for this organization in the amount of $226,000 of the total assessed value, and again, based on our valuation parameters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Valderrama, any questions of the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's more on clarification question, if I may, Mr. Chair. So in this facility or in this unit located at 1790 Main Street, is there or are there any giving of relief to the sick, needy, and indigent people being conducted in this location?
Yes, absolutely. The programming I just went through. Yep.
Okay, all of those programming, and not just maybe an office space for the organization, or yeah, it's the actual. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's just my question for this one, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Swearingen, any questions of the applicant regarding class and liability?
None at this time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, I do. Let me just get to it. So on page 13, and this gets back to some of the calculations, you're applying non-recoverable of 3%, correct?
3% total, yes.
But on page 14, the workup is 4%.
Page 14?
Oh, sorry, no, never mind. No, that's fine. Sorry, I was looking at two different charts.
Mr.
No further-
McIntyre, you had me scared that you caught a math error again. You do that to me every time.
I just got this hearing yesterday afternoon, so
Thank you.
you're fortunate.
Any-
No further questions.
Okay, thank you. Keep looking. Okay, Mr. Reimer. So you've removed this. There's three leases. Is that correct in this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we're dealing with one only. Just to confirm on page 8, that this organization is licensed by the province of Manitoba. I think that's what I read.
I'm
Think you missed that.
sorry. Page 8, or I'm not
Yeah,
sure it would be on
page
page.
Yeah, page 8. In their brochure, I think it was.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman. The page 8 I have is the boilerplate language with highest and best use in the analysis.
Yeah, what am I doing here? Where did I see this? Sorry. It's in their brochure.
I think, Mr. Chair, it's page 18.
18, there we go. Wrote it down wrong. Okay.
Yes, indeed.
The green, and then it says 17, 18. Where are you? Yeah, there you go. It is about the agency. It does say that it's licensed and funded by province of Manitoba.
Yes.
Continuing living. Yeah, okay. I think you missed that maybe in your presentation, but
Oh yeah, no, sorry. You're absolutely right. I didn't refer to it, but absolutely right. I was focused on its status as charitable organization and its objectives and what it provides. But yes, it is funded by the province.
okay.
And of course, they also take charitable donations as well. So
Okay. Now, who owns this building? I mean, is it a landlord that has separate leases?
that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
So when we allow this exemption, does it flow directly to this particular tenant?
Since it's this particular occupancy that is driving the request, then I would suggest yes, absolutely would be. I mean, ultimately, that would be a matter of interpreting the property tax allocation provisions in the lease. But that is absolutely my that in no way would impact the request, but yes, absolutely, that would be my expectation, is that because it's this occupant that drives the request for the exemption, they would get the benefit of the exemption directly.
Okay. And to do this individual calculation for the exemption, you've matched the cap rate and the rental rates, am I right? Close.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I do want to be clear on that. It is based on our submission as to value. So for instance, the 7.5 cap
Yeah.
that I've used, that's based on ours, and not, I don't presume to speak for Mr. Valderrama on that valuation factor, but we're just trying to be consistent among the two.
Yeah, okay. That's my only questions. Thank you very much. Mr. Valderrama, we're going to go back to you presenting on the valuation, or pardon me, sorry. No. Your presentation on class and liability, please, Mr. Valderrama.
Oh, I have none. I just had a clarification question with regard to that one. And I have asked the question and it was answered already, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then we're going back to Mr. Valderrama and we're dealing with the realty assessment appeal. And let us find your brief, please. Okay, Mr. Valderrama, 1790 Main Street.
As I've already presented the page one of my evidence, I would like everyone to go to page 3, where the photos of the subject property are.
Okay.
So on page 3, I do have some an aerial photo of the subject property and sort of like a map on top of it, where it is located on Main Street. And on page 4 are some rent comparables ranging from $11.60 per square foot to $16 a square foot. Their lease start dates vary, ranging from year 2015 or 2008, I believe, and 2021. And of course, also varying in leased area from 1,000 square feet up to 6,000 square feet. And on page 5 is the income workup of the subject property. As mentioned earlier, there are 3 units or premises totaling to 4,142 square feet. And the potential rent is about $73,503. Vacancy loss is 5%. Or $3,675, giving it an effective gross income of $69,828. The expenses is 3% or $2,095, and the shortfall rate at $7 per square foot calculates to $1,450. Applying the expenses and shortfall rates to the effective gross income gives a net operating income of $66,283. Applying the overall capitalization rate of 6.65%, the capitalized value rounded is $997,000. And on page 7 are some capitalization rate charts. The chart, this particular property falls under the retail section of the capitalization rate chart. It is on the 3rd row, which is called strip. It has a range of 5.6 to 6.75%. That's between 20th and 80th percentile. And that's my presentation, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valderrama. Mr. Reimer, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Just a couple, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Valderrama, we can agree that the valuation date, called the reference date for this assessment, is April 1, 2023, correct?
Yes, that's correct, as I've indicated or mentioned earlier.
Could we turn briefly to your page 4?
Page 4, yes.
So the lease comparables, again, we could agree the leases that are closest to our reference date are numbers 1 and 2 and 5, which were negotiated in 2019 and 2021.
That's correct.
And those ranged from 1170. There was two basically at 1170 to 1180, and then one at $16.
That's correct.
Okay. Did you have a chance to review the income and expense information for the subject prior to the hearing?
I was unable to. No.
Okay, fair enough. And the capitalization rate, now to your page 5, just briefly, Mr. Valderrama, that the 6.65%, that's a model-driven capitalization rate, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Ms. Warren, any questions?
Some of mine were answered, but just one for the assessor if he's inspected the property.
No, I wasn't able to.
Okay, thank you. That's that's questions, Mr. Chair.
Mr. McIntyre.
Just one question. On page 4, what would you consider your best comparison?
For looking at probably East area, since all the units are below 1500, around 1403 and below, I would go with more of on the main street kind of also, 1829 or maybe 1721. Although the 1829 was negotiated back in 2019, and after 5 years, 2024, it's probably renegotiated again. 1721 is a 30-year lease at $15, which is about quite long. And if we look at the overall or effective year built of these rent comparables, most of which are older buildings, and I mean, that would indicate that a lot of these net rents per square foot are a little bit on the low side, I would, in my opinion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Valderrama, could you provide the blended rate you're using for your workup, please?
Just gonna go. So the blended rate is
Page.
the blended rate would be $17.75 rounded to the nearest cent.
Okay, thank you. And your cap rate is 6.65%, I believe?
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question arising out of the questions posed by the panel members.
Go ahead, Mr. Reimer.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Page 4, Mr. Valderrama, just briefly. The question was posed, which are the two, or what you would consider to be the best. Now, for 1721 Main Street, which is the very bottom one, that lease was negotiated in May of 2008, correct?
Yes, as indicated, lease start date, yes.
Right, so that is by far the one furthest removed from our valuation date?
Yes, it is. And at the same time, it is closer to the subject property. And also, I mean, it has a bigger lease area. So, I mean, adjustments will have to be made on the net rent depending on the factors that are indicated here on the different columns that are in here in the rent comparables chart.
Sure. So if evidence were presented, Mr. Valderrama, of leases in the subject building negotiated very much closer to the reference date, could we agree that those would probably be better indicators than a lease negotiated in May of 2008?
Could be.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Reimer, allow us to get to your brief and deal with the realty portion of this assessment, please.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Reimer, when you're ready, please.
Thanks. Just initially, very briefly on page 2, please, just to summarize our request. So the present assessment is all Code 60 other taxable at $997,000. Our request this afternoon is to amend the assessment rolls such that $500,000 of the roll continues to be Code 60 other, fully taxable, but for the reasons I've previously discussed, that $226,000 be amended to Class Code 40 school tax exempt for the option space. If we then go to page 11, please. There's a few different points, and I will be transparent. The evaluation parameters we've applied, Mr. Chairman, there's different sort of categories that the department applies in its valuation parameters. I've actually applied parameters that are based on not the retail coding, but the neighborhood shopping center coding, because it's a multi-tenant facility. So my vacancy is slightly different. My shortfall rate is slightly different. At the end of the day, it won't have a material effect on the NOI, but I wanted to point that out. So on page 11, recall, Mr. Chairman, I'd asked Mr. Valderrama about the impact of evidence for leases negotiated in the building closer to the reference date, and our valuation includes, as shown on page 11, a total potential income of $60,093, and that's on the chart towards the bottom of the page. 2 of the 3 leases were negotiated in 2022. One of them, in fact, in October of 2022, just a few months prior to the reference date. And the third one was in August of 2021. So that was the reason for my questions, and Mr. Valderrama was forthright on the comparables that the department was able to provide. I'd suggest to you that these leases, though being closer to the reference date and at the subject property and being fully arm's length between landlord and tenant, freely negotiated, that these represent the best evidence of the net rental rates achievable for the subject. For the board's reference, I do have on page 12 a chart of a number of different comparables, again in 2022, some in early 23 and 2021. I provide that for reference. The overall range actually is very, very similar to what Mr. Valderrama has presented. Certainly what it confirms is that the leases in the subject negotiated in 2022 and 2021 are well within that range. I'd suggest to the board that the heavy reliance be placed on that as to the potential rent capable of being generated by the subject. So if we go to page 14, so again, you can see the total potential income of $60,093 based on the net rental rates in place. And where we differ, the department's applied a vacancy allowance of 5%. I've applied 4%. So just a touch lower. And again, this was based on how I categorized the property. The shortfall rate applied by the department, I believe, was $7. The shortfall rate I'm applying is the $9. Just to give the board a sense of it, the difference in the shortfall calculation, the department's shortfall calculation is $1,450 in total. My shortfall calculation is $1,491, so it's less than a $50. Actually, it's a $41 difference. So it just isn't material to the overall discussion. The capitalization rate, though, that is a significant point of disagreement, and we're suggesting a cap rate of 7.50% for the reasons that I'll get into at a very high level very shortly. So running that through, as you see on page 14, the NOI we calculate is $54,467. With a capitalization rate of 7.5% leads to the conclusion of a total assessed value of $726,000. So the rest of the materials following that relate to the options request for the school tax exemption. So what I'll do now, and again, Mr. Chairman, I'd propose to do this sort of once because the capitalization rate, in fact, in the next case, the capitalization rate applied is very, very close. So I'll just go through this for the board's reference at a higher level. If the board members and Mr. Valderrama could pull up our retail capitalization rate study, please. Let me know when you're there, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I do have it now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Does everybody have it?
Yes, thank you.
Good, thanks.
Okay.
So I'm going to go at a high level, Mr. Chairman. It's obviously a very detailed study, but I want to touch on some of the highlights for the purposes of this appeal. Could we go initially to page 8, please? So at the top of page 8 is basically a graph that shows what was happening with the Bank of Canada and the interest rate adjustments that were made in a very, very short period of time coming out of the pandemic. As you can see there at the top, the rates absolutely plummeted when we got into the pandemic era in early 2020, and they stayed at historically low records right up until the first months of 2022. That, and the board members will be aware of this, of course, that's when interest rates really started to increase very rapidly because of inflationary pressures and such. And by the reference date of April 1, 2023, the rate had fully increased 425 basis points from the low, I believe it was the low is 0.25%, and by the reference date it had gone up to 4.5%. The reason that's important is the literature, and in fact our study refers to it, that the interest rates that are present as of a given date certainly would have an impact on capitalization rates, the cost of money, but also some of the corresponding investment alternatives that are caused by all of this have a very much an effect on capitalization rates. At the bottom of page 8, there is a chart that talks about Government of Canada 5 and 10-year bonds. Those are the bar graphs at the located on that chart, and as well as mortgage interest rates. And predictably, you can see that as mortgage rates were increasing, or I should say it the other way around, as bond rates were increasing based on the Bank of Canada's increase in rates, so were mortgage rates. And that, of course, stands to reason that the mortgage rates are going to be very much moving in lockstep with the Bank of Canada's rates. Even more interesting on page 9, briefly, this is where, so investment alternatives with a reference of a 10-year Government of Canada bond yield being the lighter shaded line, and the national average capitalization rate. So as you can see there's, at different points in time, there's a different sort of quantum of the spread between the two, but the trend lines are very, very similar as bond rates, the 10-year bond rates decline as an investment alternative. So too do the capitalization rates, but as they increase, then the same effect will ultimately be felt in capitalization rates, and investors will take that into account. There is a lag, undoubtedly there's a lag, but you could see at the right-hand side of that chart on page 9 that the capitalization rates that were evident at the time were starting to tick upwards in response to that rise in the bond yield, which in turn was very much influenced by the Bank of Canada's rates. So that, as far as theoretical background, provides the backdrop for our capitalization rate analysis. Then if we go very briefly to page 19, and again, I'm going to sort of cut to the heart of the matter. Mr. Chairman, recall that my suggestion for this particular property was a capitalization rate of 7.5%. So the chart on page 19 has a total of 13 properties that indicates the different capitalization rates as we've calculated them. The details of the cap rate calculations are in the appendices to the materials. The average cap rate of those properties is 6.83, median 6.75. But recall, certainly from our perspective, the transactions that were sort of in 2020 and 2021 and the very early part of 22 would be undoubtedly very much influenced by those historically low rates, which had, by the reference date, had increased rapidly and substantially. There are two transactions, and I will be very blunt and transparent. Neither of the two transactions are comparable as far as the asset goes to the subject property, but I will reference them. There was a sale, the index number 4, the sale in McPhillips Street. This is a regional shopping center with a capitalization rate of 9.13% as of March 31st, 2023. And as well on index number 13, a sale of a very large mall on Pembina with a cap rate of 6.87%. Those indicators certainly do reflect, in our opinion, the significant shift in the interest rates and bond rates and the expected capitalization rates. The remainder of the sales for the properties range from, I believe, index number 7 is sort of an outlier at the low end at 5.42%. The remainder are between 6.42 and 7.17%. Again, with those transactions at a time in a climate much different than the reference date. And we're suggesting with that the effect of those rise in rates would certainly impact the calculation of those cap rates in a very much in an upward trajectory had they traded closer to the reference date with the rise in interest rates. So we are this afternoon asking the board to consider a capitalization rate of 7.5%, reflecting the asset, but also reflecting the very significant change in economic circumstances and the economic climate as of the reference date, based on that data. And then so finally, you need not turn back to it, but back to our main submission. With the application of the capitalization rate of 7.5%, based on the NOI that we calculated of 54,467, we come in at a total requested value of 726,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Valderrama, any questions of the applicant's evidence?
Yes, Mr. Chair. On the cap rate study on page 19, there are 13 indices here, or sales with calculated cap rates. This subject property is considered as a CMRST, is that correct?
That's the way that the department's categorized it. I wouldn't say that's the case. It's not a retail store, Mr. Valderrama. As I mentioned earlier, I've treated it as a small retail strip.
So CMSTP, is that correct?
The STP, yes, absolutely.
Okay, and I was just looking at either the RST or CMSTP as well, and the CMSTP, if I calculated it correctly, giving it an average on all of the CMSTPs here would fall around 6.5, 6.6, or 6.5.
Mathematically, I have no doubt you're correct, Mr. Valderrama, but that gets to my very point about the timing of these transactions. Right. It suggests you a cap rate assumption based on interest rates that were the prime rate being at 0 or the Bank of Canada rate being at 0.25% are very, very different than when that same bank rate in the span of a few months had gone to 4.25%. Hence, that's why I'm saying, again, mathematically, I'm sure you're right, Mr. Valderrama, but I would not suggest you could just lift those cap rates from a very different economic climate.
Okay, and going back to the evidence, the main evidence for the subject property on page 12, at the bottom of the chart, there's a sentence there that says we will apply a potential annual market rent of 74,490 in our valuation. Is that the one that you're using?
That's an error. Nope, that is not the one I'm using. Thank you for pointing that out. See, you beat Mr. McIntyre to it. This is great. So to be clear, that is a typo. So at the bottom of page 11, Mr. Chairman, and to be clear, our potential net market income is 60,093 based on those rates shown there. Thank you, Mr. Valderrama, for pointing that out.
And so there's the shortfall rate of $7 per square foot.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
and that's all the questions I have.
And the vacancy rate as well. We're using 4 instead of 5. Yep.
Okay. That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valderrama. Mr. McIntyre, I assume we have no questions now, or?
Questions have been asked and answered. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. McIntyre, I beat you to it.
He stole his thunder. Miss Warren, do you have any questions of the applicant?
Not anymore. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I forgot. Yeah, now I know. Mr. Reimer, regarding Mr. Valderrama's question, are you using different parameters than retail store? Did I hear that right?
So I'm using the retail strip parameters. I thought, okay. But yeah, that's right. So slightly lower vacancy, slightly higher shortfall rate, and as I say, mathematically, it would be virtually immaterial when you balance those two out. Okay. As far as the NOI calculation, yeah.
And this, I'll call it a strip mall.
Yep.
was built in 1981. Do I have that right?
It was built in 81 with an effective age of 81.
Yeah,
And
okay.
yep, that's right. And has a low, and I think we refer to this, so the line to building ratio is 1.76 to 1.
Yeah, okay. All right, I think that was my only question. Mr. Valderrama, any requirement for summary?
No, no summary from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes item number 6, 1790 Main Street. Next one on the docket, the last one, I guess, item number 7, file number 24-2143, roll number 14-010-282-000. Address is 511 Selkirk Avenue, and we're dealing with a 2025 Realty Assessment Appeal. And again, Mr. Reimer, are we dealing with classification and liability?
Yes, indeed. Yep.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Reimer, allow us to get to your brief, and you should proceed first with that liability issue, please.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, when you're ready, please, Mr. Reimer, 511 Selkirk Avenue.
Thank you very much. So 511 Selkirk Avenue, roll number 14-010-282-000, board file number 24-2143. Quick turn briefly at page 2 of our materials. So the owner and occupant is the West End MCC Mennonite Central Committee Community Assistance Center, Inc. The gross floor area is 6,863 square feet. Plan area is 2,854. Has a basement of 1,155 square feet and a leasable area of 6,863 square feet, which includes the basement. It's an older structure, originally built in 1930, has an effective age assigned by the assessor of 1944. The site area, as one might imagine, is quite small. It's 3,494 square feet. The request, Mr. Chairman, is to there's 2 requests, well, 3 requests actually. It's to reduce the assessed value, but for our purposes right now, we are requesting that the property be amended from Code 60 other taxable to Code 40 institutional school tax exempt for the reasons that I will get into very shortly. So if we go then to page 15. So this property is fully occupied by the Manitoba Incorporated West End MCC Community Assistance Center, Inc. This is a charity, registered charity that provides relief to, we'd suggest, aged, indigent, or sick persons, and falls within 23(1)(e). If you recall, Mr. Chairman, from our previous discussion, 23(1)(e) has a couple of requirements in order to fit within that framework. It has to be a registered charity, a charitable organization, used primarily for the purpose of giving relief or assistance to aged, indigent, or sick persons. And we're suggesting that this organization definitely fits within that framework. Here is the nub of the issue, though, in this case. And this is based on our experience and previous discussions, both at the board here and also with the assessor. The subject is used as essentially as a thrift store, and therefore, and here's the distinction. We certainly think because the organization is used as a thrift store, they do employ, or not employ, but they use volunteers, and also the funds that are generated from this flow to the larger organization for these charitable uses that we believe would qualify. But I think that's, and I won't presume to speak for Mr. Valderrama, but I think that is the distinction that has been made in the past as to why the assessment department isn't quick to provide the school tax exemption because of that separation, because this is sort of a smaller operation within a much larger operation with various affiliates that provide relief to indigent or sick persons. I don't believe that the overall objectives of the organization, there wouldn't be any dispute that what in and of itself it would likely qualify. I believe it's the separation with this particular property being used as a thrift store with the funds flowing to the larger organization to fulfill these things. Our position is that, certainly because the any profits that are generated from this facility, because they flow to the organization to fulfill these charitable objects, there shouldn't be a distinction between that this thrift store with the funds flowing to the organization and the larger organization providing the benefits. It's all going to the same place. It's to some extent it's akin to a charitable organization that has a small amount of administrative space, with the rest of the space being devoted to the very delivery of the services that are exempt. It's completely affiliated. It's a sort of a one-way flow of revenue to the larger organization to provide these services, and therefore we suggest should be captured in the school tax exemption in this case. But I did want to be very clear. That is the distinction, I believe, and I'll let Mr. Valderrama speak to it further, but I believe that's the distinction the department's making. I'll just very quickly, if you go to our page 25, and for reasons I don't understand, it's printed the page number twice, so it actually reads page 2525, but it's just obviously page 25. But that's the confirmation of the registered charity, the charitable status, which is a requirement. And then starting on pages 27 and onwards, it does talk about the objectives of the Mennonite Central Committee. Did want to just very briefly go to page 30. It talks about priorities and approaches, and at the top of page 30, the priorities to MCC's priorities in carrying out its purpose are disaster relief, sustainable community development, justice and peace building. And then further on the approaches at the bottom half of that page, MCC approaches its mission by addressing poverty, oppression, and injustice and their systematic causes, accompanying partners in the church in a process of mutual transformation, building bridges across cultural, political, and economic divides. So the objectives certainly appear to fit very squarely within 23(1)(e), and the distinction being that this is a thrift store operating within the larger organizational context, but providing ultimately funds to achieve those very objectives. And so we are asking for the Code 40 school tax exemption in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Valderrama, any questions of the applicant?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just to clarify, the occupier is MCC Thrift Store, correct? Or
well, it's actually Manitoba Incorporated West End MCC Community Assistance Center. Yes.
And that is different from the MCC as a registered organization, correct?
No. If you go to page 25, Mr. Valderrama.
Page 25, okay.
Yeah. This was the reference I made earlier. This is actually the registered charity for this organization that's owning and occupying the premises. So the West End MCC Community Assistance Center Inc. is the registered charity and is the owner and occupant of the subject. But to my further discussion, this is sort of a sub-organization within the larger framework of the Mennonite Central Committee. So to that extent, that's right. It's the smaller organization as a registered charity operating within the bigger environment of the MCC.
So there are two different registrations as a registered charity for MCC and the West End MCC Community Assistance Center Inc.
There absolutely there would be. I haven't investigated. I'm guessing there's quite a number of them in the MCC umbrella, but certainly this is a registered charity whose funds flow to MCC to provide relief of poverty and such, and disaster relief.
And the property is being used to sell donated clothes and other stuff, right?
Yep, thrift store. Yep.
Okay, thrift store. Okay, basically a thrift store.
Yep.
So in that case, would there be any giving of relief for sick and needy and indigent people in this property?
Well, I guess if you, depending on what assumptions you make, if it's a thrift store providing sort of more economically disadvantaged folks in society a chance to buy these items, I'd suggest that's one theoretical, obviously, possibility. But again, Mr. Valder, this gets back to the funds being generated, any profits over expenditures being generated are flowing back to the larger MCC organization to provide the disaster relief and the relief from poverty. So is it a direct sort of outflowing from that this sort of smaller organization directly to? No, it isn't, and that's the distinction I'm trying to be very clear about. But at the end of the day, it is doing exactly that. The money's flowing through the larger MCC umbrella back down to the folks that need it through disaster relief and poverty. But it is not direct. I'm not trying to suggest that.
And so the money that's generated from selling the items in the thrift store, it's the net profit basically, or the net of expenses would flow through the MCC to fulfill its duties or mission or
Yes.
objective.
Yep.
So the actual charitable work and functions of MCC are not being done on this property. Would that be correct to assume?
No,
Or to
This is a thrift store.
Yes,
That's
okay.
what it is. Yep.
Okay, and that's all the questions I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre, any questions of the applicant?
Certainly, I think you will agree there's a number of MCC stores throughout the city.
There are.
Are there any other ones, to your knowledge, that are similar to this?
There's other similar ones, and actually the board's decisions have been a little inconsistent. There's some that have been where liability and classification have been confirmed. There is actually, though, another one that we're involved with directly where the exemption was granted. And again, I don't want to speak for Mr. Valderrama, but I believe that has been appealed to the courts by the city. So that's where it lies right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Warren, any questions of the applicant?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reimer, is there a pending muni board on this subject property or other similar properties?
Actually, not Muni Board, Mr. Chairman. It's actually gone to court on the liability issue. Yeah, and there's
Right.
nothing has been decided as yet. It's sort of just pending right there right now.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So your contention is that it's a thrift store, but its funds are distributed to the Mennonite MCC committee, and therefore it should be considered exempt.
Exactly, because the funds, I'm just going to call it the profits, because the profits ultimately flow directly to it, the larger MCC, who then fulfill the objectives of the disaster relief, poverty relief. That, notwithstanding that it isn't direct, and this was to Mr. Valderrama's question, the money that's flowing is not going directly from there to those individuals. It's flowing up through the larger organization. But we don't believe that sort of that step through the process would disqualify the subject property for the charitable, or I should say, for the school tax exemption.
Okay. Now this is relevant to the realty side, but I noted that the INE submitted by the subject property owner showed a loss, but I guess that sort of points to the fact that this thrift store is providing support to the community by selling these items to
at a very much discounted rate too. Yeah. I wouldn't expect it would be operating at a loss every year, but yes, you're exactly, and I hadn't even picked up on that. You're exactly right. For the year 2022, it did show a loss.
Yeah, okay. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you. Mr. Valderrama, I guess we're going back to you and we're going to deal with the realty portion of this, right?
Mr. Chair. Thank you. Yep.
Actually, you know what, Mr. Valderrama, I'm going to ask you to summarize right now your position on the class and liability, if you could.
Well, the class and liability, as based on the questioning that I have gathered and the answers, it's simply the providing or the giving of relief to the sick, needy, indigent people are not conducted there. Is not conducted there. Yes, it is a thrift store. The funds or the net profits flow through the MCC head organization or the umbrella organization. However, the property is being used as a store to generate profits, and that to maximize profits as much as possible. Although, as evidence put forward by Mr. Reimer, there was a reported loss back in 2022, which we do understand a lot of retail have suffered a great deal of loss during the pandemic, and succeeding years after that hasn't recovered yet as of that date, around 2022. It doesn't negate the fact that there's the actual operation or the actual mandate of MCC is not being fulfilled in this property, Mr. Chair. And I think that's, in summary, that's the position I'm taking, or our department is taking, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Having said that, I would leave the decision on your hands.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Reimer?
Nope, no questions. That's consistent with the position as I understood it and that I presented. Thank you.
Yeah. So your position, would you mind stating your position?
Absolutely.
Briefly.
Our position would be that because the profits of the thrift store, if any, ultimately are flowing to the larger MCC organization and being used for the relief of poverty and disaster relief, that this particular organization, registered charity in this building, providing those services and the funds to MCC should fall within 23(1)(e) for that, because it ultimately flows for that purpose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Valderrama, we're going to go to the realty portion. Allow us to get to your brief, please.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Valderrama, pardon me, 511 Selkirk Avenue, when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As indicated earlier, the file number for this is 24-2143. There's a roll number of 14-010-282-000. The property is located at 511 Selkirk Avenue. Again, we're dealing with 2025 as the roll year, with a reference date of April 1st, 2023. The assessed value is $452,000. The property is classified as an other property with a taxable liability. The property is a CMRST, or a store, with one building, two premises, 2 stories, with an actual year built of 1930 and an effective year built of 1944. It has a wall height of 13 feet, construction class of masonry bearing walls. It is zoned as C2 with a land area of 3,494 square feet, a planned area of 2,854 square feet, a basement area of 1,155 square feet, and a gross floor area of 6,863 square feet. It has a total leasable area of 5,708 square feet. On page 3 are some photos. One is an aerial photo and the other is more like a map of where it is located on Selkirk Avenue. And on page 4 are some rent comparables. They're all ranging from $12.45 to $17 per square foot. The lease start date ranging from 2011 to 2023. And leased area of 1,047 to 2,570 square feet. On page 5 is the income workup. It has a total leasable area of 5,708 square feet with a potential rent of $43,352. The vacancy loss is 5% or $2,168. And effective gross income is $41,184. The expense ratio is 3%, and the shortfall rate used is $7 per square foot, giving it a net operating income of $37,950. Applying the overall capitalization rate of 8.4%, the capitalized value rounded is $452,000. And on page 7 is the capitalization rate chart. And that's my presentation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Valderrama. Mr. Reimer, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple. Mr. Valderrama, could we go briefly to your page 4, please?
Yeah.
Can we agree that the second comparable is post-reference information that shouldn't be considered by the board with a lease start of September 2023?
Yep, it's past it, and I apologize for that one.
No problem. I figured it was an oversight. So, Mr. Chairman, just ask the board to disregard that one. Now, with respect to the remaining comparables, and one's in 11 and one's 15, one's in 2019. So the leasable area that the department's applied, that's half main floor and half second floor, correct? For the total leasable area?
For the comparable or for the subject property?
Yeah.
Yes, so one is storage mezzanine and one is the actual area.
The main floor. Okay. And of course, I'm assuming, but correct me if I'm wrong, that of the three comparables there, those are all main floor rents, I'm assuming.
Yes, they are.
Mr. Chairman, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. McIntyre, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Warren?
Any of your comps thrift stores?
Not sure. I don't have that information. Which ones, or if there are any.
No, I'm just wondering. Okay, so you're saying that none of your comps were thrift stores then?
I cannot say if they are or they are not. I don't have that information. Ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Valderrama, could you please provide your blended rate on the potential rent?
I'll quickly calculate that one, Mr. Chair. It's $7.59 rounded to the nearest cent.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. That's my only question. Mr. Reimer, pardon me, allow us to get to your brief, please.
Thank you.
511 Selkirk Avenue. When you are ready, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Could I ask the board members, Mr. Valderrama, to turn initially to our page 14, please? So this distills essentially, Mr. Chairman, down to a question of potential market rent for the space. There is a slight difference in the capitalization rate in this case. The department's applied 8.4%. We're applying 8.5%. The difference, quite simply, is not really that material. So I'll leave it in the board's hands as to whether to go with 8.4 as suggested by Mr. Valderrama or the 8.5 as we're suggesting. But I will focus a little more on the potential net market rent. The remainder of the parameters, the vacancy, the shortfall, the other expenses are exactly the same. So again, it comes down to the potential rent. As you can see at the top of page 14, we've actually included for our valuation the basement space at a very low storage rate, which is probably a little bit generous, but we've just assumed that the low storage rate would be appropriate. And then we've applied a blended rate of $6 a square foot to the main and second floor areas to come in at a total potential net market rent of $37,713. And so in turn, if we now turn back briefly to our page 12, please. And at the top of page 12, there is a listing of a total of 7 leases in the general area. We couldn't find anything particularly close to the subject, Gesundheit, to the subject. But you can see there the leases that we have, and these again are main floor leases, range from a low of $387 to $882 a square foot. Given the location and the condition, this is an older property, if you recall, built in the 40s. Actually, I think it was built even it was built in 1930 with an effective age of 44. So this is a property that I'm going to suggest would, if it were on the open market, would struggle to find an occupant that would be willing to pay significant net rents. But notwithstanding that, based on the rental indicators we've got there, we're suggesting the rate for the main and second floors blended rate of $6 a square foot. With a nominal basement storage rent of $3 a square foot applied to the basement space, which then results in a total potential rent of $37,713, which, Mr. Chairman, blends out to an overall rate, including the basement space, of $550 a square foot. So taking that potential rent and running it through, going back to page 14 now, Same vacancy rate, same allowances applied, slight difference in cap rate, very, very nominal. Then it results in a requested value of $381,000 rounded. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. 381, is that correct? Sorry.
That is correct. 381,000. Yeah.
Rounded. Okay, perfect. And requesting a class code 40S, is that right?
Exactly right. Yep.
School exempt. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. Mr. Valderrama, any questions on the income evidence presented?
I have none, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
I have none, thank you.
Ms. Warren?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just, so the assessor isn't including the basement area, and Mr. Reimer, you are, is that correct? Sorry, I'm just pointing differences here. Yeah,
Exactly right. We're using a sort of lower storage rate for the basement
okay.
in our valuation. That's right.
And including that basement area, your blended rate you're using is $550?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
If you were, I'll give it, actually, that's a good point, Mr. Chairman. What I'll do is I'll give you the blended rate, the total rent divided by the area above grade. So 37, just for a point of reference, 37,713 divided by 5,708, which is the area above grade. So the blended rate expressed as that is $6.61 a square foot.
Okay. Dollar less than the assessor,
Yes.
basically. Okay.
Pretty much. Yep.
Okay. But your NOI still stays at 32,350. Would that be accurate?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's my questioning. Okay, Mr. Valderrama, any requirement for summary?
None, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer.
Thank you all for your time this afternoon.
Okay, that concludes item number 7, address 511 Selkirk Avenue. We have heard all the items scheduled on the docket today, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you both for appearing. You'll hear from us as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.